Hello, this clinic is about making roads. There's many ways to make roads, and they're all good, valid ways. A quick YouTube search or Google search will quickly provide you with many of those methods. This presentation will show you the pros and cons, in my opinion, of these techniques and the method that I use and prefer best in doing my roads. First method that's commonly used is the plaster approach. This consists of placing some form of formwork, be it either styrene or balsa timber edging, then using a plaster or product like Woodland Scenic Smooth It, mix it up and pour it in between the formwork and then trowel it out relatively smooth. This is straightforward and easy to understand process. However, you need to sand the surface when you're finished, when the plaster is dry. That creates a lot of fine dust, which becomes very difficult to keep clean on, get rid of in the layout. You have the hard raised edges where you've removed the formwork that need to be either smoothed over or you need to build it up with a curb or something. And you risk spilling wet plaster on scenery and track work unless you've got everything well masked off. The next common approach is the sandpaper approach, where you simply cut and glue the appropriate grade of sandpaper, stick it down, and that forms the road. You then paint it. Again, an easy to apply, easy to understand technique. The disadvantages: if you brush against sandpaper, you leave a skin trail. Just try it. And it becomes very hard to remove those marks on the sandpaper. Also, the road becomes very flat. There's no contour in it, there's no camber in it. And it's difficult to apply and carve potholes, cracks, and all the other detritus that ends up on our roads. Next method is using tile grout. It's similar to the plaster approach, but you don't necessarily use formwork because it's thick enough to stand by itself. And the tile grout provides a texture. So it gives some sort of a three-dimensional approach to the road material. Its advantages: it's quick and easy to apply, and as I say, it provides a good texture. And it's also very good for creating dirt roads using a brown tile grout. The brown tile grout representing the dirt very easily. The disadvantage, again, it needs sanding and levelling unless you're very good at applying the tile grout. Another approach commonly used is to either use plastic, card or paper. You cut the paper or plastic, styrene, whatever, to the shape that you need for the road. You paint it and you glue it down. Again, an easy to understand approach. Disadvantages: it's difficult to get compound shapes over shaped terrain. If you're sticking it on straight plywood baseboard, easy. But if you're trying to stick it over a bit of terrain that rises and falls and goes around curves, much harder. Again, it's difficult to describe repairs and cracks in the roadway, and it has limited texture. It tends to be too much of a flat earth. And although we think our roads are flat, they're not. My approach is to use a product called EVA. EVA is a recycled rubber product. It's a foam rubber in a sheet. It cuts easily with the scissors or knife. The product was originally made for underneath play gyms as a soft protective surface. It's also used for gym mats and used for various other applications where you want a bit of cushioning. Often used in factory environments as a cushion on the concrete floors under where people stand. It's very cheap. You can buy it on eBay for about $1 a sheet. And it comes in multiple colours and multiple thicknesses. For the roads here, I use a 2mm thick sheet, but I also use a 10mm sheet when I'm creating rock walls and things like that, because again, it fits easily, it's easy to cut, easy to shape. What I do is I cut the sheet of EVA for the road surface. I then cut a narrower sheet to go in the centre of the road, sticking the narrow sheet down first and then the other normal width road sheet over the top. It develops a camber shape for the road, so you get that traditional camber. I glue the EVA down with acrylic contact cement, but others use tacky glue or PVA. All methods work quite well, so you just glue it down, let it dry. I'll now break to a demonstration of my step one. Step one of building my roadway. In this particular example, I'm building a sloped roadway with a bend in it. So step one, I've got the underlying base for the roadway. This is a sheet of EVA. I place it on the EVA and mark it out with a pencil. Nothing overly complex about that. I now want to build a gutter on the inside of the roadway. It's going to be in O scale, and I'm printing the gutters in with a 3D printer. This is an example of one piece of the gutter, and it will sit like that on the side of the road. Using my scale rule, that tells me for HO scale on the side it would be 2 foot. So I will cut a 2 foot allowance or perimeter around the inside of this EVA sheet. Having marked it out, now the simple task of using a pair of scissors to cut out the form and shape that I want. Or I could have used a sharp knife, a scalpel blade, and a steel rule would have achieved the same objective. As I've said, EVA is incredibly easy to work with. So there's the piece that will go on the roadway. And as I say, curbing will then go on adjacent to it like so. I'll now mark out the smaller centrepiece which will provide the camber of the road. And I'm going to make that, the original piece, if I measure in HO scale, is 17 foot across there. So I'm going to make the small camber piece in the middle 6 foot. Again, with the scissors, simply cut it out. Put it here. Just do a slight adjustment here. So that's how it'll come together. The centerpiece for the camber will be stuck like that. Then the other piece will be stuck over the top like that. Then held down with weights till the glue dries. I'll now move to the gluing section. Step one, I'll just put down a couple of sheets of newspaper so I don't get a glue mess everywhere. And as I've said before, I use quick grip acrylic as shown by the packet. Applying the glue quite liberally, as one tends to do, and then just troweling it out with a icy pole stick. I'll then place it in its position. And then the main piece that'll go like that, I'll put glue on that and lay it out. To weigh the foam down whilst the glue is drying, I use a series of different weights. Typically, I've recovered old pandroll clips from the railway side of the railway track. I paint them rust-proof paint and then use them as weights in my modelling to help the glue dry. And also railway spikes, old rusted railway spikes. Clean them up and put them on the layout for holding items down whilst glue is drying. There we go. And that makes step 1 of the process. Now moving to step 2. With step 2, after the glue has dried, I paint the EVA road material with a suitable grey paint. You apply the paint using a sponge roller or sponge so there's no brush marks to show, and the road gets a mottled textured look. And then you leave the road paint to dry. You can use any acrylic type paints. I am currently using Knox asphalt coloured paint, but you could easily mix up suitable grey and white and black with a tinge of brown to lay down for your road surface. I'll show you this now in another demonstration, painting the road surface. As I said, I'm using the Knox asphalt product. Just give it a bit of a shake. Pour some of it out into this whole tray that I have. And using a roller first to demonstrate the roller technique. Not that there's much complex in a roller, but simply roll the paint on. Because I'm going to put curbing, I'm not overly worried about spillage over the sides. If you were worried about that, obviously you'd do something about either masking it or covering it in some way to protect the edges. So the rolling process, just like rolling regular house paint, nothing tricky. I've also brought along a piece of sponge to illustrate that approach. So you can just blob the paint on with the sponge. And it gives a motley effect, which a lot of people prefer. Because I'm going for the smooth bitumen, I'll actually go back to the roller for this particular application. Now we'll set and let that dry well, good and proper, the paint. It doesn't take long to dry, but I want it good and dry for the next stage where we start to do some line markings and things. So that's it for stage or step 2. Step 3 of my approach, this is applying the road markings. There are many ways again to apply road markings. My method is to use a stencil with a stiff ruler and a product called Staedtler Glassochrome pencil, which is basically what in the old days used to be called a Chinograph pencil. In my long lifetime ago, I used to use Chinograph pencils all the time to update status boards, to record radio frequencies on windshields of aircraft and other various uses. These days they're a lot rarer to use because everybody uses whiteboards, but they still are available at proper stationers. In Australia we use a place called Officeworks. I use the stencils and the pencil. I then vacuum or blow away any crumbs left from the pencil so they don't get caught somewhere else and streak the road. I then use a ballpoint pen, biro, to draw cracks, potholes and manholes in the surface of the road to give those interesting patterns. I'll now show this in this demonstration. I'm now demonstrating step 3 of the process. First part is I will mark out where the centre line is by putting some measuring across, picking the centre and putting a small pencil mark just to mark where the roadway centres are. Then I take the magic pencils that I like to use, the Chinograph type pencils. And I'm using some stencils. So I lay the stencil down the centre line. I also, as well as the centre line marking, put down edge markings, because modern roads we have the edges delineated so that they can be tracked and seen by cars that have lane diverging technology. Now I'll continue the rest of that process off camera, because you don't need to see me standing there drawing lines, but I will put in a pedestrian crossing markings, which so you can see how that stencil's done. I should also preface and say that in Australia all the road markings these days are white. Prior to the 1970s we did use some yellow road markings, but they've now all been removed and replaced by white markings. But if you use yellow, and you can use yellow for private property like supermarket car parks and such like, the yellow pencils are available just as easily as the white pencils. So there's the level crossing done, and this road at the end will actually turn left. So I'll just put a lane marking on the roadway for that. As you can see, the techniques make with using the stencils and the pencils is far, far superior than trying to mask it all up and paint it. Once I've done those markings, I just quickly zip out the shop vac and vacuum up any crumbs from the pencil. Then I start making any other road markings, like one can make little cracks. I'm not sure how well that's seen in the camera, but because unfortunately the road marking is very dark on this particular case, but I will make it lighter later. Just put some random squiggly cracks, and I'll also put a couple of small manholes just using a template stencil, and just colour it in. I'll now complete the rest of this off camera. For the final step, I then use pan pastels or dry brushed lighter and darker shades of the road colour to show tyre wear and oil droppings on the road. I also apply any curbing or grass, dirt edges to the roadway and add vehicles. Now to demonstrate step 4 in my process of using the EVA roads. I finished step 3 as far as laying out the marking on the edges of the road, the centerline marking for the curved section of solid marking, so no overtaking on the curve. I've put in the zigzags, which are warnings to drivers prior to the pedestrian crossing, and as I said, there's some pen markings on there. I now move to using some pan pastels to mark out the road tracks for vehicle tracks and wear and tear on the road. I use sometimes a paintbrush, and the flexible sponge to smudge it all out. After putting on the roadway material like that for where the vehicle tracks are, I'll then put some dirty stains down the middle of the track for where oil spills have occurred on the road. So that's essentially the road. Normally I would then put grass or gravel along the sides to be the shoulder for the road, but in this case, as I've mentioned earlier, I'll be using some 3D printed guttering which will go along the sides like so when it is all printed, but still in the process of printing at the moment. And then of course you put vehicles on the road and the job is done. Back on the methods of road marking, as I said, there are many ways of doing it. A common way is to mask and then spray paint or airbrush the paint or dab paint between the masking tape to show the road markings. Unfortunately, the disadvantage of this is the paint bleeds under the markings and it requires lots of masking work to get it right. The second method, which is commonly used, is to use a paint pen against a ruler or stencil. Paint can still bleed and it's difficult to keep all lines the correct width because as you're pressing the paint pen going along, the flow is not consistent and you'll end up with a thin piece of line and a wider piece of line. But commonly used approach, Woodland Scenic sell lots of good paint pens and there are good videos on how to use that. Another method is to use line charting tape or chart lining tape. This is getting hard to get because nobody uses big charts on walls as much as they used to. It's also difficult, depending upon the thickness of the width of the lining tape, to bend it around corners and curves. So you end up with a challenge there. So hence why I fell to the Staedtler pencil approach. It keeps the correct size on the lines, it doesn't bleed, it's easy to control. Disadvantage is sometimes the pencil breaks up a little bit, but that's okay because that makes it look like slightly worn lines on the road. So it helps with the weathering approach, so to speak. Now for the materials, I talked about EVA foam. EVA's technical name is ethylene vinyl acetate. And it's a copolymer of ethylene and vinyl acetate, if people know what that means. Basically, it's just a handy little modelling material, very easy to use, very cheap to get hold of. As I say, the thicker stuff I use for building structures, for rock walls and such like, the thinner stuff for road surfaces, concrete surfaces and so on. The road paint I'm using at the moment is that Knock asphalt, and there's a part number there. The stencils, I'm using Knock Street Starter stencils, but I will be making other stencils of my own for other markings that I need, simply by downloading a picture from the internet, tweaking it a bit and then cutting it out. And these are the pencils, which, as I say, I get from the local office supply place. Some examples of well-detailed roads using the EVA. This one shows how they've coloured in different sections, put in shading, used pastels, and jagged the edge a bit where the road surface is near the stop sign. This gives a very realistic and effective road surface. This one, the person who did this has done quite a bit of work. They have EVA for the platform surface, they have EVA for the road and also for the car park area. For the car park and road area, they've created the cobblestones by painstakingly marking out the cobblestone pattern using ballpoint pens on the foam. They've also used the foam in the vertical, as the front of the car park area, as a vertical wall there. Again, it comes up very, very effectively. This one is also used the foam for the concrete footpath, for the car sales interior and for the roadway. Very simply applied, but very effective. Another advantage of the EVA foam, if you have roads over a railway track, you can use the foam and between the rails, you simply push it down. I use double-sided tape to hold it down so that it won't jump up again, but can still be removed if I need to. And it looks very, very effective. Much easier than trying to put plaster between the rails and then trying to run your wagons over it and try and clear the track out and so forth. So back to the features of EVA. It's excellent for concrete roads and sidewalks. Best ever again is between the tracks. Just cut and push it down. Even pre-RP25 wheels work well. Marking the EVA, as I've said a couple of times, it's as easy as using a ballpoint pen. Just draw your lines, put your squiggles in for cracks, and it comes up quite lovely. Painting, it takes all sorts of different paint. For the road surfaces, you can see the bitumen side and you can see the concrete side, it's all EVA. And then the road markings are put on top. And just before I go, I'll acknowledge the wealth of work that's been done by others. In particular, Kathy Malat has an inspirational video on how to make tarmac roads, which uses the EVA technique. It's just that when it comes to the road markings, she uses paint, whereas I go to the pencils.